welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and today we have another book talk video, and today we're going to be talking about Stephen King's new collection, If It Bleeds. Now, if you've been around this channel for a while, you know I love Stephen King. I get really excited whenever he's got a new book coming out. I especially love it when that book is a short story collection. This one is kind of that. There's 4 stories in this book. The title story, If It Bleeds, is a little longer. It's just over, I think, 200 pages. And then the other 3 stories make up the other 200 pages of this 400-page book. The reason I love short stories from Stephen so much is because he's just the master of it. I don't think anybody does it better, at least not the kind of stories that he writes. The only person in my mind who gives him a run for his money is Joe Hill, and you know, that kind of makes sense, but yeah, this was great. Now, as with any short story collection, it's kind of hard to give too much detail about each of the stories. Now, where this one is only 4, it's a little easier. So what I'm going to do is just give you a little info about each of the stories, and then you can decide from there if this sounds like something you would like to read. Now, the first story in this book is called Mr. Harrington's Phone, and I think this might be my favorite, maybe. It was really good. It's about a young boy who begins helping out an elderly gentleman in his town. The man pays him. It's a job. He offers him a job. And what he does is he goes up to the old man's house, which is a mansion. This is a very wealthy, retired man. And he reads to him, or he'll help by watering the flowers, or he'll help by going into town with him and running into the store to get groceries, because Mr. Harrington, like I said, he's very old. He's not in the greatest health. And so this boy just wants to help him out any way that he can. And this boy's name is Craig, and he just really develops a fondness for Mr. Harrington. And Mr. Harrington feels the same way, and for different occasions, I think it's his birthday, Christmas, and Valentine's Day, Mr. Harrington always sends him a card with a scratch ticket in it, even though he's just a kid. But one day, Craig hits the jackpot. He wins $3,000 on the scratch ticket. And recently, his dad had bought him, Craig, a cell phone for Christmas. And because Mr. Harrington's up in this big old house by himself, Craig wants to buy him a cell phone, an iPhone. And Craig's dad is kind of like, listen, don't you think if Mr. Harrington wanted an iPhone, he could go buy one himself? But Craig's not deterred by that. He wants to do this for the old man. And when he first brings it up to Mr. Harrington, he kind of gets the reaction his dad had predicted. But then Craig kind of reels him in by showing him that you can check the stock market, which is what Mr. Harrington used to work at. And you can see newspapers. You can get the news online quicker than you could when you get the daily paper. So that really, that's what gets Mr. Harrington interested in this phone. So the story goes on from there, and it's a great story. It's a little creepy. It's not super scary, but it's a little creepy, and I just loved it. One thing that really made me laugh as well is it's written in that signature Stephen King nostalgia style about a time gone by. But, you know, instead of this being the 90s and him writing about, you know, 20 years ago in the 70s, we're now in 2020 and he's writing about 20 years ago and it's the early 2000s. And that was stark at the beginning. I was like, oh my God, he's writing in this nostalgia style about the early 2000s. And then after a beat, I was like, right, because that was 20 years ago. So, but yeah, I loved that. I loved everything about Mr. Harrington's Phone. Great story. Now, the second story in this book is called The Life of Chuck. This story started off really strong for me. I was like, what is happening? Where is this going? And then by the time I got to the end, while I enjoyed it, it wasn't what I thought it was going to be, which, you know, that's great. But it just started off as one thing and then ended up being another thing entirely. And it was very interesting. The best way I can tell you about this story without giving too much away is that it's kind of a life story told backwards. Make of that what you will. And if you start reading this book after seeing this video and you hear that, you might be like, what are you talking about, while you're reading the first part, but you'll understand what I mean as it goes on. Now the third story is the title story, If It Bleeds, and it's the one that clocks in at over 200 pages. And this is, I guess you would say, a direct sequel to his book that came out a couple of years ago, The Outsider. It has a couple of the same characters in the book, in the story from the book, and that's Detective Ralph Anderson. And then there's also, hang on, I can never Gibney, also Holly Gibney. And it was so fun getting to see those two characters again. I really love Holly as a character. I think she's great. And yeah, it's just a really interesting story. Definitely one of the strongest ones. I could see a lot of people having that as their favorite one. There was just something about Mr. Harrington's phone that I just love so much, so I think that is my fave. But I think If It Bleeds will be a lot of people's favorite, especially if you've read The Outsider and you're happy to see these characters again. Reading that story, it also makes me wonder maybe what else Stephen King has in mind for characters from The Outsider, especially Holly. I think that'll be very interesting if maybe down the line we get a book centered around Holly. I would love that. I think that was just fantastic. And now the final story in this book is called Rat. And I liked this one a lot as well. I thought it was maybe going to get a little crazier than it did. Which, when I tell you what it's about, you're going to be like, you thought that was going to get crazier? But I just did. I thought maybe it was going to get a little darker, but I still loved it. So Rat is about a man named Drew, who is a writer. I love when Stephen King writes about writers, which he often does. I just love it. And so Drew, he's got a wife and a couple of kids, and he's had a lot of luck writing short stories, but he just can't get a novel out of himself. And the last time he tried, it went so badly that he ended up having a breakdown and almost burned the house down, and it really caused a rift in the relationship between him and his wife, understandably. So when he starts talking about that he now all of a sudden has a new idea for a novel, she is, again, understandably concerned. But he's like, no, it's different this time. It's different. I've got the whole idea in my mind. It's basically just going to be writing down what I see. I don't even have to do any of the work hardly. So to kind of see what he's working with, he decides to go up to his father's cabin in the woods and stay there for 2 or 3 weeks to get a start on this book and make sure that there's as much there as he thinks there is. So she kind of reluctantly agrees. He takes a sabbatical from work and off he goes. Now, when he gets up there he runs into one of the townspeople who he shakes hands with, and then he goes into the house and he gets to work. And like he thought, it's just flowing out of him. Now, there's a storm coming, and like I said, he's kind of up in the middle of nowhere, and his wife is on the phone and she's concerned. She's like, maybe you should come back home. It's been a couple days at this point. She's like, you know, if the storm gets as bad as they say it's going to get, you could get stuck up there for who knows how long. But he's really adamant he doesn't want to. He does not want to come home. So after he runs out of the food that he brought, he's starting to feel a little under the weather. Like he's got a bad cough, he's sneezing, his throat's really sore. So he decides he's going to go into town and get some groceries and some supplies, get some cold and flu medicine. And when he goes in there, he finds out that the man who had greeted him and he had shook hands with when he had first got to the house or the cabin is in the hospital. He's taken ill. And now that Drew himself isn't feeling good, that kind of gives him the creeps because, you know, this guy's sick enough to be put in the hospital at this point. But he takes the medicine, he goes home, kind of doses himself, the storm starts, and at one point he takes a break and he's resting on the couch, and like he is writing. It is coming out of him so quickly. But then once he gets a little sick, he starts to notice things that happened the last time he had trouble with the novel are starting to happen again. And for Drew, it's less of writer's block as writer's overwhelmment. In that it's not that he can't find the words, it's that he's finding too many words, and he's finding too many words that are too good and he can't choose between them, and it's almost paralyzing him because he feels like whatever word he chooses, there's a better word lurking just behind that one, and he wants to find that perfect word. So anyway, this night he lays on the couch and then he wakes up and there's a rat. There was this whole thing with this rat that he had found outside and he brought inside because it looked like it was dying. And now it starts talking to him and it offers him a very interesting proposal. And the rat says, you know what, I can grant you a wish. You could have killed me or let me die and you didn't. So now I'm going to grant you one wish. And of course, Drew's wish is related to his book. He wants to finish this book. And the rat says, you know what, no problem, I got this, but someone close to you has to die. And Drew's like, oh, no. Like, my wife and my kids, they're more important to me than this book. And the rat's like, yeah, no. I wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about, what about, and he names off a guy that Drew works with at the university. It's like the head of his department, who's currently very sick with pancreatic cancer. And so from there, it's Drew deciding if he should make this deal in regards to somebody who's already sick and is probably going to die anyway, in turn for having his novel finished and finished well. So it's him deciding to make the deal. It's him dealing with the aftermath of the deal and just what all happens from there. And I thought it was a great story. So if these sound at all interesting to you, I would definitely recommend picking them up. If you generally like Stephen King books or short stories, I think you'd also like this one. I also do like the cover art. It's got the cat, but then also the rat there in the middle. Yeah, if you've read this book already, let me know in the comments down below what you thought of it. Let me know which story was your favorite. And if you haven't read it, yeah, like I say, I would definitely recommend. And I really don't think you can go wrong with a Stephen King short story. Anyway, you guys, I hope you have a fantastic weekend. I'll see you though before the weekend's over when I post another 1 or 2 chapters from Emily of New Moon. And yeah, I will see you then. Bye guys.